A wealthy rancher saw a Apache widow beaten each day by the town until he took her as his bride. The small frontier town sat quietly in the late afternoon sun, dust swirling gently along the empty streets, wooden buildings, weathered by years of harsh winds and blazing sun. Most of the windows were dark, with only a few shutters open, letting in a soft glow. The town seemed almost frozen in time, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and rumors spread faster than the wind. Life here was hard. People worked from sunrise to sunset, tending to horses, cattle, and small shops that barely made enough to survive. But for some, life was harder than for others. Among them was Island, a young Apache widow, who had arrived in this town some months before under a cloud of grief and loss. Island's past was quiet, known only to herself. Her husband had been killed during a raid years ago, leaving her alone in a world that had no place for a woman without a family. She had traveled for weeks, carrying what little she owned, until she found this town. At first, she had hoped the people would be kind. She had imagined a place where she could live quietly, work honestly, and remember her husband without fear or shame. But she was wrong. From the very beginning, the townspeople treated her with suspicion and cruelty. Her Apache heritage made her different, a target for gossip and ridicule. The moment she arrived, whispers followed her footsteps, sneers met her gaze, and harsh words fell from lips that were meant to smile. She was strong, but the constant abuse weighed on her. Each day she walked the streets with her head bowed slightly, avoiding the worst of their insults, her heart hardened but her spirit unbroken. Samuel Dawson, the wealthy rancher, noticed her almost immediately. He had been a man of wealth and influence for many years, owning one of the largest ranches for miles around. He was respected, sometimes feared, but mostly left alone, living a life of quiet routine on his sprawling land. He rode into town occasionally, usually for supplies or to handle business, and he observed the world with the careful eyes of someone who had seen a lot in his lifetime. That day, as he guided his horse down the dusty main road, he first noticed Aylin standing outside a small store. A group of townsmen had gathered, their faces twisted with cruel amusement as they mocked her. One man shouted something vile, another laughed, and a woman rolled her eyes at her as if she were less than human. Aylin stood straight despite the blows, her face calm but her eyes betraying the pain she felt. Something inside Samuel stirred, a mixture of anger and concern he had not felt in a long time. For several days, Samuel watched from a distance. He noticed the pattern. Every morning she walked to the market carrying a small basket, only to be taunted along the way. The children, copying their parents, would throw rocks at her skirts. Men would jostle her roughly or speak harshly when they didn't even need to. Even those who claimed to be polite offered her nothing but sneers. Samuel could not understand why no one intervened. The town had always prided itself on law and order, but here, in the open streets, a woman was beaten by words and gestures every single day, and no one stopped it. He felt a surge of frustration. How could decent people stand by and watch this happen? Why did everyone look the other way? Samuel was not a man given to public displays of emotion. He was quiet, deliberate, and thoughtful, a man who preferred to act carefully rather than speak impulsively. But this situation unsettled him in a way that he could not ignore. For the first time in many years, he felt a personal responsibility. Not because it was expected of him, but because it felt right. He thought about stepping in, but the town was small, and everyone knew each other. A wealthy man defending a lone woman could spark gossip, even hostility, and he was not naive. He weighed his options carefully. Still, he could not abandon her to this daily cruelty. Something had to be done, and he knew it. One afternoon he saw her again near the market. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the dusty street. A group of townspeople had gathered, and it was clear they had come to harass her once more. Samuel's horse snorted as if sensing his tension. He dismounted quietly, tying his horse to a post, and approached the group slowly. The townspeople turned to him, startled by his presence. He was known in town, and his reputation often kept people respectful. Still, some of the men sneered, thinking this was a simple show of wealth, that Samuel would not act. But Samuel's eyes were fixed on Eileen. He could see her face, calm but tense, and the small flicker of relief when she noticed him. In that moment, he decided he would speak, not with anger, but with authority and kindness. "Leave her be," Samuel said in a firm voice. It was not loud, but it carried across the street. The men laughed nervously, uncertain whether he was joking. "I said leave her be," he repeated, stepping slightly closer. The tone left no room for argument. One of the men muttered something under his breath, but the group slowly dispersed, casting glances at Eileen and Samuel. She looked at him, eyes wide with surprise and gratitude, though she did not speak. Samuel did not linger to bask in the moment. He nodded once to her and walked away, leaving her standing quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her basket. That night, as Samuel rode back to his ranch, he could not shake the image of Eileen. He thought of the way she carried herself, strong and resilient, despite the constant abuse. He thought of the way the townspeople had treated her, and his anger simmered quietly under his calm exterior. He had wealth, land, and influence, but it was moments like these that reminded him that true power was not in money or property. It was in courage, in the choice to act when someone else was suffering. For Samuel, this was no longer a matter of curiosity or casual observation. He felt a responsibility that he could not ignore. For Eileen, that day was both frightening and strange. She had grown used to the cruelty of others, and kindness was almost alien to her. She wondered why Samuel had helped her. Was it pity? Was it because he wanted something from her? She did not know. Still, a tiny spark of hope lit within her. For the first time in many months, she felt that maybe, just maybe, there was someone in the world who could see her not as a target, not as an outsider, but as a person worthy of respect. She did not speak, not yet. Trust did not come easily, especially after all she had endured. But she remembered his eyes, steady, calm, without judgment, and she allowed herself a small, quiet sense of relief. Over the next few days, Samuel continued his careful observation. He did not interfere immediately again, choosing to understand her life first. He watched how she moved through the town, the small gestures she used to protect herself, and the quiet ways she endured her hardships. He noticed the kindness she showed to the small children who dared approach her, the careful attention she gave to helping an elderly neighbor, and the patience she showed even when insulted. Eileen was no weak woman. She had strength that many could not imagine, and that strength only made Samuel's determination stronger. If he could help her, protect her, and eventually earn her trust, he thought, it could change both their lives. Days turned into weeks. Samuel's interest in Eileen grew, not as a mere curiosity, but as something deeper, an admiration for her courage and resilience. He began to visit the town more frequently, finding small reasons to cross paths with her. Sometimes it was buying supplies, sometimes delivering messages from ranch hands, but always he ensured his presence was noticed, always protective, never threatening. Eileen, for her part, remained cautious. She had learned the hard way that kindness could be fleeting and that trust had to be earned, not given freely. But Samuel's consistency began to make a difference. He did not rush her. He did not demand gratitude. He simply offered support in ways that mattered, ways that quietly shielded her from harm. By the end of the first month, Eileen had begun to recognize a pattern. Samuel was not like the others. He did not mock, he did not push, and he did not treat her as a curiosity. Instead, he watched, he waited, and he acted only when necessary to protect her. It was a strange feeling, this mixture of relief and caution, but slowly, a sense of hope began to take root. Maybe, she thought, someone could care without expecting anything in return. Maybe she could begin to imagine a life where fear did not rule every step, and somewhere deep inside Samuel felt the stirrings of a purpose he had not felt in years. A sense that his life, his wealth, and his strength could be used for something truly meaningful. The first part of their story ended not with a declaration of love or a dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet understanding that the world could be harsh, but sometimes a single act of courage and kindness could make all the difference. Samuel and Eileen had not yet spoken fully to each other, but their lives were now connected in a way that would shape the days and months to come. And in the dusty streets of that small town, a wealthy rancher and an Apache widow began a journey that would change them both forever. After that first day, Samuel found himself drawn to the small town more often than before. He told himself it was for business, checking on supplies and overseeing transactions. But the truth was far simpler and more honest. He wanted to see Eileen. Every time he arrived, he watched quietly from a distance, observing her movements, the way she carried herself, the way she endured the unkindness of the townspeople. He noticed the small things, how her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her basket, the careful way she avoided stepping on loose boards, and the way her eyes scanned the street for trouble. These little details spoke volumes about her life, about her strength, and about the quiet vigilance required to survive in a world that offered her little kindness. Eileen, meanwhile, had begun to notice Samuel as well. At first, she kept her distance, unsure of his intentions. She had learned long ago that appearances could be deceiving, that a smile might hide cruelty, and that a gentle voice could mask selfishness. But Samuel was different. He never stared, never whispered behind her back, and never treated her as though she were a curiosity or a spectacle. There was something steady and calm in his presence, a reassurance that she could not explain but felt deeply. For Eileen, this quiet consistency was unusual, and it sparked a tiny flicker of trust she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. One morning, Samuel rode into town just as the sun was rising, the streets still quiet and empty. He noticed Eileen heading toward the market, her small basket swinging gently by her side. A few children played near the town square, laughing and running, and one of them threw a small stone that bounced off her skirt. She flinched but continued walking, her expression calm, her head held high. Samuel dismounted and approached her slowly, making sure not to startle her. "Good morning," he said gently. His voice was soft, yet carried a certain authority that immediately commanded attention. Eileen paused, her eyes wary, and looked at him. "Good morning," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. There was no warmth, yet no hostility, only cautious acknowledgement. Samuel noticed the tension in her posture, and the way her hands gripped the basket tightly. He realized that any sudden movement or harsh word could frighten her, so he chose his next words carefully. "It is not safe to walk through the market when the children are playing so roughly," he said. He spoke as if offering advice, not as a command. "Would you like me to carry your basket for you?"
Eileen hesitated, studying him closely.
She had been offered help many times before, but often it had come with strings attached, expectations, judgment, or ridicule. She did not trust easily. Still, something in Samuel's calm tone and steady eyes convinced her to nod slightly. He took the basket gently from her hands, careful not to touch her fingers directly, and led the way through the street, keeping an eye on the children and the few townsfolk who lingered nearby. As they walked together, Samuel spoke quietly about mundane things: his ranch, the weather, the animals, and the condition of the roads. Eileen listened, her eyes scanning the street but her mind slowly relaxing. There was no judgment in his words, no hidden meaning, just simple conversation that allowed her to breathe without fear. For the first time in months, she felt a small sense of normalcy, a brief moment where the world did not seem entirely against her. Samuel noticed the subtle change in her demeanor, the way her shoulders relaxed slightly, the way her eyes softened, and he felt a quiet satisfaction. He was not trying to impress her with wealth or power. He was merely offering her the simple dignity of safety. Over the next several weeks, Samuel continued to make small gestures of kindness. Sometimes he would carry her basket. Other times he would pay for her groceries without making a fuss. He would offer her a seat in the shade while she rested, or gently steer a horse away when it wandered too close to her. Each act was small, almost ordinary, but they all had the effect of shielding her from the harshness of the town. Eileen began to notice a pattern. Samuel did not interfere for show, nor did he demand gratitude. His concern was genuine, quiet, and consistent. Slowly, She began to trust that his intentions were honest. The townspeople, however, noticed too. Gossip traveled quickly through the dusty streets. "Samuel Dawson is taking an interest in the Apache widow," they whispered. Some were curious, some were jealous, and some were openly hostile. They did not understand why a wealthy man would care for a woman so different from himself, a woman whom they had always considered an outsider. But Samuel paid little attention to the gossip. He cared only about Island's safety and well-being. He knew that true kindness often attracted envy, and that this small town was full of people who measured worth by wealth and conformity rather than by character. He remained undeterred. One afternoon, as Samuel rode into town, he noticed a group of men surrounding Island near the well. They were speaking harshly, mocking her accent and her clothes, and one man even reached out as if to push her. Samuel's heart raced. Without a word, he dismounted and strode toward them, his tall frame and calm expression commanding immediate attention. "Enough," he said firmly. The men froze, unsure whether he was joking or serious. "Step away from her," he continued. There was no threat in his voice, only quiet authority. The men hesitated, then slowly backed away, muttering under their breath. Aylin watched silently, her heart pounding, relief washing over her in waves. She had never seen someone intervene so calmly, so decisively, and without seeking attention or praise. After the men left, Samuel turned to Aylin and nodded. "Are you all right?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded, though her hands still trembled slightly. "Thank you," she said quietly. There was no flourish, no expectation, just a simple acknowledgement of his help. Samuel smiled faintly, understanding that this small moment of trust was more valuable than any grand gesture. He handed her basket back, careful to place it down gently, and walked with her to the edge of town, ensuring no one else interfered. By the time they parted ways, Aylin felt a small sense of safety she had not felt in months. In the days that followed, Samuel continued his quiet acts of kindness. Sometimes he brought her fresh water from the ranch. Other times he left small supplies at the general store for her. He never made a show of generosity. He did not announce his actions or expect thanks. Aylin began to notice, and slowly she allowed herself to accept his help without suspicion. It was a cautious trust, one built on consistency and respect rather than words or promises. She began to speak more freely around him, sharing small details about her life, her past, and the struggles she faced in the town. Samuel listened without judgment, offering advice only when asked, and respecting her independence in all matters. One evening, Samuel invited Aylin to ride with him on a short journey outside of town. He did not insist, but offered it as an option, giving her the freedom to refuse. She accepted, curious but cautious. As they rode through open fields and along dusty trails, Aylin felt a sense of freedom she had not experienced in a long time. The sun was low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of earth and grass. For the first time, she felt that life might hold more than pain and hardship. Samuel spoke softly about the land, the animals, and the work required to care for a ranch. He did not ask her to speak, but sometimes she shared stories of her past, of her home and family, of her late husband, and of the life she had once known. Samuel listened, attentive and respectful, never interrupting, never offering empty words of sympathy. This quiet companionship began to form a bond between them, one built on understanding and shared experience rather than expectation or obligation. As the weeks turned into a month, Aylin began to change. She walked with her head held higher, spoke more freely, and allowed herself to hope, however cautiously. She had learned that Samuel was different, that his kindness was real, and that he could be trusted. She did not yet call him a friend, and certainly not more than that, but the walls around her heart began to crumble, slowly and carefully. Samuel, for his part, found himself thinking about her constantly. He admired her strength, her patience, and the quiet dignity with which she faced each day. He knew that helping her was only the beginning, that trust and respect would take time to build, but he was willing to be patient. He understood that true care was measured not by speed, but by constancy. By the end of this second part of their journey, Samuel and Island had not yet formed a full friendship, nor had they spoken of feelings or intentions. But a connection had been established, delicate and tentative, yet undeniable. It was built on small acts of kindness, quiet observation, and mutual respect. Samuel had learned more about Island than anyone in the town, and Island had begun to feel that not all people were cruel or selfish. In a world where survival often depended on toughness and mistrust, this connection was a fragile but powerful thing. Both of them sensed that their lives were now intertwined, and that the events of the coming days would require courage, patience, and heart. In the quiet moments as the sun set and the town grew still, both Samuel and Aylin reflected on the changes in their lives. Samuel thought about the responsibility he felt, the desire to protect someone who had faced so much pain, and the unusual bond forming between them. Aylin thought about the strange comfort she felt in his presence, the safety he offered, and the hope that perhaps in this harsh and unforgiving world there could be kindness, trust, and even friendship. Neither knew what the future held, but both sensed that something important had begun, something that would shape the rest of their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. The town had grown restless. Rumors about Samuel Dawson's attention toward Aylin had spread, carried by whispering lips and watchful eyes. Some townsfolk were curious, others jealous, and a few openly resentful. The small town thrived on routine, gossip, and judgment, and anything that disturbed that balance drew attention. Aylin, however, had begun to move through the streets with a cautious strength. She had grown used to Samuel's quiet presence, the steady support he offered, and the protection he provided, but the hostility of the townspeople was relentless. Each day brought new whispers, snide comments, and occasional insults aimed at reminding her that she was different, alone, and vulnerable. One morning as the sun began to rise behind the hills, Samuel rode into town earlier than usual. The air was dry and crisp, carrying the familiar scent of dust, leather, and wood smoke. He noticed Aylin standing near the well, her small basket in hand, her expression calm, but her body tense. A group of men lingered nearby, clearly waiting for the right moment to harass her. Samuel's stomach tightened. He had known that trouble would come eventually, but seeing it unfold in the quiet morning light made his sense of urgency sharper. The men began their usual cruel game. One stepped closer, mocking the way she held her basket. Another pushed past her, muttering insults under his breath, as if he had a right to do so. Aylin flinched, but did not retreat. She had endured these moments for months, and her courage had become a shield, even if it could not stop the sting of words and gestures. Samuel, seeing the scene unfold, dismounted quickly, tying his horse to a nearby post. He walked toward the group, his long coat swaying with his movement, his eyes fixed steadily on the men. "Enough," Samuel said firmly, his voice carrying over the street. The words were calm, controlled, and deliberate, yet they demanded attention. The men froze, startled by the authority in his tone. "Step away from her," he continued. One of the men sneered, attempting to brush past him, but Samuel's presence was imposing, and the man hesitated. The others followed suit, muttering complaints, and slowly retreated. Aylin watched silently, a mix of relief and surprise in her eyes. She had grown used to defending herself, yet this intervention felt different. It was not aggression, nor a show of power, but a quiet, unwavering protection. Samuel turned to her once the men had gone. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. She shook her head, though her hands trembled slightly. "No, I'm fine," she replied, her voice steady but soft. He nodded and lifted her basket, carrying it for her as they walked toward the edge of town. Along the way he spoke of ordinary matters, the condition of the roads, the arrival of supplies, the work awaiting at his ranch. His calm presence allowed Aylin to breathe more easily, to release some of the tension she carried with her like a heavy cloak. That evening, Aylin sat quietly in the corner of her small room. The events of the day played over in her mind. She thought of Samuel, of the way he had intervened without anger or demand, and of the rare sense of safety she had felt. She did not yet trust him fully, nor did she fully understand her own feelings, but she realized that for the first time in many months, she felt a small flicker of hope. It was dangerous to hope, she knew, yet she allowed herself this small comfort. The next few days were a delicate dance. Samuel continued to offer small gestures of support, carrying her basket, delivering food, or simply walking beside her to ensure safety. He did not ask for thanks, and he did not speak of friendship or intention. His actions spoke louder than words, and slowly, Island began to rely on him in small ways. She noticed how he always made sure the street was safe before passing, how he spoke softly to children who played nearby, and how he treated animals with gentle respect. There was a rhythm to his kindness, a steady presence that contrasted sharply with the harshness of the town. However, the hostility of the townspeople did not relent. They whispered behind doors, snickered in the streets, and tried to undermine Samuel's influence. One afternoon, as Island walked to the market alone, a group of men surrounded her, more aggressive than before. They pushed her, shoved her basket, and shouted insults, testing the limits of her endurance. Samuel, observing from a distance, felt a surge of anger. He knew it was time to act decisively. He rode into town swiftly, dismounting in front of the group. His eyes, calm yet firm, met each man's gaze in turn. "You will not touch her again," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The men hesitated, then backed away, muttering under their breath. Island stood silently, her heart pounding, her trust in Samuel growing with every protective gesture. After the confrontation, Samuel invited Aylin to walk with him outside the town limits. The air was fresher there, the land wide and open, and the shadows of the hills stretched long in the late afternoon light. He did not speak immediately, allowing her to find her own rhythm. Finally, he said, "You should not have to face this alone. No one should." Island looked at him, her eyes reflecting both wariness and gratitude. "I have been alone for a long time," she admitted softly. "I am used to it." Samuel nodded, understanding the depth of her words. "Perhaps," he said gently, "but being used to something does not mean it is right. You deserve safety and respect, as anyone does." In the following weeks, Island and Samuel's relationship deepened, though quietly and carefully. Samuel introduced her to small parts of his ranch life, feeding animals, tending to crops, and understanding the land. Island's skills, born from years of survival and resilience, were evident. She knew how to care for animals, repair fences, and work with the land in ways Samuel admired deeply. Their shared tasks created an unspoken bond, a connection built on respect, mutual learning, and quiet understanding. She began to feel a sense of belonging she had not felt since the death of her husband. Yet trust was not easily won. Aylin remained cautious, wary of sudden kindness or unexpected motives. She had learned to read people, to detect deception, and to guard her heart. Samuel, aware of this, never pushed her. He allowed her space, never asking for more than she was willing to give, and never speaking of things she was not ready to hear. His patience became a quiet lesson in itself, showing her that trust could grow slowly and steadily, that protection did not need to come with control, and that kindness was often stronger than force. One evening, after a long day working at the ranch, Samuel and Aylin sat together by a small fire. The sun had set, leaving a blanket of stars overhead, and the cool night air carried the scent of earth and growing plants. Aylin spoke softly of her past, telling him small stories of her life before the town, of her family, and of her late husband. Samuel listened, never interrupting, never judging. He offered gentle words when appropriate, but mostly he allowed her to speak, providing a patient ear. For Aylin, this was both strange and comforting. She had spoken to few people with such openness, and the act of sharing her memories felt like a small release from months of isolation and fear. Samuel, in turn, began to reflect on his own life. He had wealth, land, and respect in the town, yet he had lived many years in quiet solitude. He had faced challenges, losses, and loneliness, and the arrival of Aylin had stirred something in him he had not expected. A desire to protect, to nurture, and perhaps even to connect in a way he had not imagined possible. He realized that helping her was not merely an act of kindness, but a chance to share his life in a meaningful way, to bridge two worlds that might otherwise never meet. The climax of this period came one afternoon when the town's hostility reached a peak. Aylin had been shopping for supplies when a group of men surrounded her, more aggressive than ever. They pushed her roughly, shouting insults and trying to intimidate her. Samuel, arriving just in time, intervened decisively. He stood between Aylin and the men, his presence commanding, his voice steady. "Back away," he said simply. There was no anger in his words, only authority. The men hesitated, glancing at each other uncertainly, and then slowly retreated. Aylin, shaking but unharmed, realized that Samuel's protection was more than mere action. It was a promise. As they walked home together, Aylin began to feel a small but growing sense of hope. She had survived alone for months, enduring cruelty and isolation. Yet here was someone who offered her more than protection. Samuel offered respect, patience, and understanding. For the first time, she began to imagine a life where she could breathe without fear, where trust could exist alongside caution, and where safety was not a fleeting illusion but a tangible reality. By the end of this period, their bond had grown stronger. It was not yet friendship in the fullest sense, nor was it affection, but it was connection. Samuel had demonstrated that he could be trusted, that his intentions were sincere, and that he valued Aylin not as a curiosity or outsider, but as a person worthy of respect and care. Aylin had begun to allow herself small openings in her guarded heart, tentative trust that might one day grow into something deeper. The quiet understanding between them was fragile, yet powerful. Both knew that the challenges of the town, the whispers of gossip and the cruelty of others would not end easily. But they also knew that together, even in small ways, they could face these challenges and carve out a measure of safety and dignity in a world that often offered none. Their journey was only beginning, but in these moments, beneath the wide sky and amidst the dusty streets, a foundation of trust and protection had been laid, a foundation that would carry them through trials yet to come. The days grew warmer as spring approached, and the ranch outside the small town began to show signs of life after the long winter. Samuel's land was vast, stretching over rolling hills dotted with cattle, horses, and patches of fertile soil. For months, Samuel had quietly watched over Aylin, protecting her from the cruelty of the town, offering small gestures of kindness, and building a quiet trust. But now, he knew that trust needed space to grow beyond the town streets. He wanted Aylin to see a world where she could be safe, respected, and valued, not merely protected, but free. One morning, Samuel rode into town earlier than usual. He found Aylin near the market, as was becoming routine, carrying her small basket. He dismounted, his movements calm and deliberate, and offered her a gentle smile.
"I have a place you might like to see,"
he said simply. She looked at him cautiously, her eyes wide with curiosity.
"What do you mean?"
she asked. Samuel did not answer immediately. Instead, he extended his hand, as though inviting her to take a small leap of trust. "Come with me, just for a little while," he said. The words were gentle, free of pressure or expectation. After a moment of hesitation, Aylin nodded. She trusted him enough to follow, though caution still tempered her movements. The ride to the ranch was quiet at first. The horses moved steadily over the dusty trail, and the wind carried the scent of grass and earth. Aylin looked around, taking in the vast expanse of land. It was unlike anything she had seen before. Hills stretched into the distance, dotted with cattle and horses grazing peacefully. Trees lined the edges of streams, their branches casting soft shadows on the ground. The air was clean and fresh, and for the first time in months she felt a sense of peace. Samuel rode beside her, saying little, allowing her to absorb the beauty and calm of the land. When they arrived at the ranch house, Samuel led her inside. The home was modest yet comfortable, filled with the warmth of a life well lived. Tools for farm work lined the walls, while shelves held supplies and books that Samuel had collected over the years. He offered her a simple meal and a place to rest, making no assumptions or demands. Aylin observed quietly, noting the care with which he had maintained the space, the orderliness of the tools, and the simplicity of the furnishings. It was a life of work, yes, but also a life of dignity and care, a life where a person could exist without constant fear or judgment. Over the next few days, Island began to explore the ranch. Samuel showed her how to care for the animals, tend to the garden, and repair fences. He did not instruct her in a way that assumed she was ignorant. Instead, he guided her gently, acknowledging her skills and knowledge. Aylin discovered that she could contribute meaningfully, that her abilities were valued, and that her presence made a difference. For the first time in months, perhaps years, she felt useful and respected, not merely tolerated, but appreciated. As they worked together, a rhythm developed between them. Samuel tended to the cattle while Aylin repaired fences. She helped with the garden, planting seeds and tending to the young shoots with careful hands. He admired the quiet diligence she showed in every task, the patience and care she brought to each small responsibility. Samuel, in turn, shared his knowledge of the land, explaining how to read the weather, track the animals, and anticipate challenges. The exchange of knowledge created a bond, one built on mutual respect and shared experience. Each task completed together strengthened their connection, quietly weaving trust and understanding into their daily lives. Despite the calm and beauty of the ranch, both Samuel and Island were aware of the challenges that remained. The town's whispers and judgments continued, and Aylin had not yet fully healed from the months of cruelty she had endured. But the ranch offered a sanctuary, a place where they could face those challenges with strength and support. Samuel made it clear that Aylin's presence there was not a favor. It was a choice. She was welcome, respected, and free to come and go as she pleased. This freedom, this respect, was something Aylin had rarely experienced, and it stirred a deep sense of gratitude within her. Over time, Aylin began to open her heart in small ways. She laughed quietly when Samuel made light jokes about the stubbornness of the horses. She shared stories of her past, memories of her family, and tales of the life she had led before tragedy had struck. Samuel listened with genuine interest, never interrupting, never judging. He offered words of comfort when she spoke of loss, but mostly he allowed her to speak freely, creating a space where she could be herself without fear. Each story shared, each small smile given, strengthened the bond between them. One evening, after a long day of work, Samuel and Island sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills. The sky was painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the ranch was bathed in a warm, gentle glow. Island spoke softly of her late husband, of the life she had lost, and of the fear she carried with her. Samuel listened, his presence steady and reassuring. "You are stronger than most people I know," he said finally, his voice quiet but firm. "And you deserve a life where that strength is valued, not punished." Aylin felt a warmth spread through her chest. No one had ever said such words to her before. No one had acknowledged her strength without judgment or expectation. It was a gift she accepted quietly, letting herself feel for the first time in months that perhaps she could belong somewhere. Their days settled into a gentle routine. Samuel continued his work, managing the ranch and overseeing the cattle. Island worked beside him, tending to the garden, caring for animals, and repairing fences. They faced challenges together: the unpredictability of weather, the stubbornness of animals, and the occasional mechanical failure. But each difficulty only strengthened their partnership. They learned to rely on one another, to anticipate each other's needs, and to communicate through small gestures as well as words. A deep trust was forming, a foundation that neither of them fully understood yet, but both felt in the quiet of shared work and quiet conversation. During this time, the town's hostility began to feel more distant, though never completely gone. Samuel's presence, reputation, and quiet authority protected Aylin from direct harm, but they could not erase the whispers or lingering judgment entirely. Still, the ranch offered a sanctuary, a place where they could exist outside the constraints of cruelty. Aylin began to smile more often, to laugh quietly at small jokes, and to allow herself moments of relaxation. She discovered that she could dream again, but the world could hold kindness as well as hardship, and that she was not powerless in the face of adversity. The bond between Samuel and Aylin began to deepen in ways neither could fully name. It was not yet love, but it was a connection rooted in mutual respect, trust, and shared experience. Samuel admired her resilience, patience, and quiet wisdom. Island admired his integrity, patience, and willingness to protect without controlling. Each day spent together strengthened their connection, creating a sense of partnership that neither had experienced before. They found comfort in each other's presence, a reassurance that they were not alone in facing the world's challenges. As the weeks passed, Samuel realized that his feelings for Island were changing. He no longer saw her merely as someone to protect. He saw her as a partner, a companion, and a person whose presence enriched his life. Island, in turn, began to feel something unfamiliar. A quiet warmth in her chest, a sense of safety and companionship that went beyond gratitude. She trusted Samuel, respected him, and appreciated his patience and kindness. In the quiet moments at the ranch beneath the wide sky and amidst the rolling hills, a foundation was forming for something deeper, a bond that might one day grow into love. One late afternoon, Samuel walked with Aylin to the edge of the pasture where the sun was setting in soft shades of gold and pink. He spoke quietly. "I am glad you are here, not because I must be, but because I want you to be." Aylin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight, and felt a warmth she had not experienced in a long time. "I am glad too," she replied softly. The words were simple, yet carried a weight of meaning, a recognition of the trust, respect, and companionship that had grown between them. By the end of this part of their journey, Island had moved fully into the ranch, finding a home where she was safe, valued, and respected. Samuel had shown her not just protection, but partnership, patience, and understanding. They had begun to build a life together, sharing work, stories, and quiet moments under the vast sky. The trust between them had deepened, and with it, the sense of possibility for the future. The challenges of the town remained, but the ranch offered a sanctuary, a place where kindness, respect, and companionship could flourish. And in this quiet, steady rhythm, Samuel and Aylin discovered the beginnings of something profound, a connection that would shape the days and months to come, and perhaps the rest of their lives. Spring had fully arrived, and the ranch was alive with activity. The fields were green, the animals thrived, and the air was filled with the sounds of life. Birds singing, cattle lowing, and the soft rustle of wind through the trees. Samuel and Island had settled into a rhythm of shared work and quiet companionship. Their days began early, tending to animals in fields, and ended in the calm of the ranch house, where they shared meals, stories, and small moments of peace. Over the months, their connection had deepened from cautious trust to mutual respect, and now a tender affection began to take root.
Alan moved through the ranch with a quiet confidence.
She fed the animals, repaired fences, and tended the garden with steady hands, her presence becoming a natural part of the landscape. Samuel watched her often, quietly admiring her strength, patience, and the quiet grace with which she carried herself. He thought about the months of hardship she had endured in town, the cruelty she had faced, and the courage it had taken for her to survive. Every small smile she gave, every careful gesture, seemed to deepen his admiration. Yet he never rushed her, never forced affection. Instead, he offered patience, understanding, and steady companionship, knowing that true love could not be demanded. It had to grow naturally. One afternoon, while working together in the garden, Samuel noticed a small bird trapped in a thorny bush. Its wings fluttered weakly as it struggled to free itself. Without hesitation, Aylin knelt carefully, speaking in soft, soothing tones, and freed the bird without harm. Samuel watched silently, impressed by her gentle hands and calm demeanor. "You have a way with life," he said quietly, his voice full of admiration. Aylin glanced up, a faint smile touching her lips. "It is all about patience," she replied softly. "Even the smallest life deserves care." In that moment, Samuel realized that her strength was not only in surviving hardship, but also in her ability to nurture, protect, and bring kindness into the world, even after all she had suffered. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. Samuel began to rely on her judgment and skills, whether it was in managing the ranch animals or planning the fields. Aylin, in turn, trusted Samuel's experience and guidance, appreciating his calm and thoughtful ways. They began sharing stories of their pasts more openly, memories of childhood, of family, of lessons learned through loss and hardship. Samuel spoke of the loneliness he had experienced despite wealth and respect, and Aylin spoke of the grief and fear she had carried after losing her husband. Each story shared built trust, understanding, and a quiet intimacy that neither had experienced before. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Samuel and Aylin sat quietly on the porch. The day's work had ended, and a gentle calm filled the air. Samuel spoke softly. "You have brought something into my life that I did not even know was missing. Peace, trust, and hope." Aylin looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light, and said simply, "I never thought I would find a place where I could feel safe and respected." There was a quiet pause, a moment where words seemed unnecessary, and yet the significance of what was unspoken filled the space between them. It was a moment of understanding, a realization that they had become more than companions. They had become a part of each other's lives. The town, though still whispering, began to take notice of the change. Samuel's reputation, combined with Aylin's calm presence on the ranch, made it clear that she was no longer vulnerable. Some townsfolk were curious, others hesitant, and a few resentful, but none dared to challenge them directly. The constant harassment that had plagued Aylin's early days in town had ceased, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of her place beside Samuel. The ranch had become more than a refuge. It was a symbol of resilience, respect, and the possibility of a better life. Samuel realized that the time had come to express the depth of his feelings. He wanted to honor Aylin not as someone to protect, but as a partner, a companion, and perhaps something more. He chose a calm evening with the sun setting and the land bathed in golden light to speak from his heart. "Aylin," he began, his voice steady but soft, "these months we have spent together have shown me your strength, your wisdom, and your courage. I have come to care for you deeply, not because I feel pity or obligation, but because I see you for who you truly are, a remarkable person, worthy of trust, respect, and love." Aylin listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of curiosity and emotion. Samuel continued, "I cannot promise that life will be easy, but I can promise that I will stand by you, respect you, and face whatever comes with you. If you will allow it, I would like you to be more than my companion here on the ranch. I would like you to be my partner, in every sense of the word." He paused, letting the words settle between them. Aylin's heart pounded, and for a moment she was silent, reflecting on the journey that had brought her from fear and isolation to this moment of connection and trust. Finally she spoke softly, her voice filled with emotion. I never thought I could feel this way again. After all I have endured, I did not believe kindness or trust could last. But with you, I feel something I have not felt in a long time. Safety, respect, and hope." She paused, taking a deep breath, then continued, "I will accept. I will be your partner as you wish, if you will have me." Samuel's face broke into a gentle, relieved smile. There was no grand celebration, no elaborate gesture, only the quiet, steady acknowledgement of trust, mutual respect, and love taking root. The following days were filled with quiet joy and companionship. Aylin settled fully into her life on the ranch, contributing her skills, knowledge, and energy to its upkeep and care. Samuel continued his work, but now with a shared sense of purpose and partnership. Their days were filled with practical tasks, laughter, and conversation, and the evenings brought quiet moments of reflection and shared comfort. Together they faced challenges: the unpredictability of weather, stubborn animals, and the occasional small inconvenience, but each challenge was met as a team, strengthening the bond that had grown between them. As time passed, their connection deepened beyond mere partnership. They began to care for each other in ways both small and profound, sharing meals, ensuring each other's comfort, and offering words of encouragement and reassurance. Samuel would bring Aylin water during her work in the garden, while she would repair fences without complaint, mindful of his guidance. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection, building a life together that balanced respect, trust, and affection. The bond that had begun with protection and cautious trust had blossomed into a profound companionship, one that promised stability, love, and mutual care. The town gradually came to accept their union, though quietly. The whispers and judgments softened as people observed the partnership that had formed. Eileen was no longer seen as an outsider or target. She was Samuel Dawson's partner, respected for her skills, wisdom, and character. The harshness that had marked her early days in the town was replaced with a quiet acknowledgement of her strength and the life she had carved for herself alongside Samuel. Their relationship became a symbol of trust, respect, and the possibility of overcoming hardship through patience and understanding. One bright morning, Samuel and Eileen walked together to the edge of the pasture. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wildflowers and freshly tilled soil. Samuel turned to her, speaking with quiet sincerity. "Eileen, I do not know what the future holds, but I know that with you life feels full and meaningful. I want us to face the days ahead together, to share our lives, our work, and our hearts. Will you continue this journey with me as my partner, my companion, and my bride?" Eileen looked at him, the light of the sun reflecting in her eyes, and felt a deep warmth. She had endured so much, yet here she was, standing beside someone who truly valued her, respected her, and cared for her with unwavering honesty. With a gentle smile, she nodded. "Yes, Samuel, I will continue this journey with you. I will be your partner as you ask, and I will walk beside you in all the days to come." Samuel's heart swelled with relief and joy. There was no grand celebration, no fanfare, only the quiet, profound understanding that they had found each other, and that together they could face whatever life brought with strength, patience, and love. The days that followed were filled with preparation and quiet joy. Friends and family, both from the town and the surrounding area, came to witness the union. The ceremony was simple, meaningful, and heartfelt, reflecting the journey that Samuel and Eileen had shared. There were no grand displays of wealth, no unnecessary extravagance, only sincere celebration, laughter, and shared happiness. Samuel and Eileen exchanged vows that honored their past struggles, their resilience, and the love that had grown from trust, respect, and companionship. After the ceremony, they returned to the ranch together, now partners in life as well as in work. Their days continued to be filled with tending to animals, caring for the land, and nurturing the small, quiet joys of life. They faced challenges as they always had, but now with a shared strength that made each difficulty easier to bear. They laughed, worked, and dreamed together, building a life rooted in love, trust, and mutual respect. The journey that had begun with hardship, cruelty, and fear had transformed into a story of hope, partnership, and enduring affection. As the sun set over the ranch, Samuel and Eileen stood together on the porch, watching the golden light spill across the fields. They were no longer merely a wealthy rancher and an Apache widow. They were partners, equals, and companions who had found strength and love in one another. The past could not be erased, but it had led them to this moment, where kindness, patience, and trust had built a foundation for a life filled with respect, dignity, and shared joy. And in that quiet golden light, they knew that together they could face the future, whatever it might hold, with courage, hope, and love.